How are you? Good? Yeah, good. Good meal tonight? Yeah. That Miller small group knows how to eat. I'm telling you. So if you ever have those experiences where you hear something, you smell something, you see something, and it just suddenly transports you back in time? Okay? Well, I had that experience with the topic for this series of lessons. Most likely to. You know, it took me all the way back to my senior year of high school when they had that list that they passed around and they shared at the end of the year in terms of, you know, who's most likely to succeed, most likely to become a professional athlete, most likely to invent something, most likely to win the Nobel Prize, whatever the case may be. I didn't make any of those. I did make the unofficial list, though. The unofficial list was the list that we did on our own without sanction from the administration. And the thing that I was voted most likely to was be dead by 25. Okay? Now, I won't tell you how I earned that distinction for a couple of reasons. One, it was stupid. Two, I have no right to be alive today. And three, I don't want to be anybody's excuse for going out and doing something even stupider. Okay? But nonetheless, I did some stupid things in high school. Some things that I'm not proud of. Some things that I wish I could reverse. However, the good news is that next year I'll make it to 25 and I'll know whether I'm going to live that long. Okay? But the reality is when I turned 25, prophetically is really when my life started. I had an experience actually on my 25th birthday and you know, woke up the next day and a new life began for me. And so I guess in some ways how my friends voted me became a prophetic thing. So, you know, just thinking about that and what we're most likely, and I wonder if any of you aspire to be most likely to do something. If there's something in you that you just look into your future, and I would like to be known as most likely to do this. Before we get there, we just have to think about the choices that we make in the life and how they impact that journey to wherever we're going to go. We're all going to go somewhere, but how the choices that we make today impact that journey. And I just want to ask you a question. Have you ever done something, said something, some kind of behavior, or even failed to do something that hurt a relationship that you had? You know, maybe it was with a parent, and maybe it was with a friend, maybe it was a teammate or a classmate or something like that. But you did something that damaged that relationship. And what it was like on the other side of that, how did that make you feel? You know, obviously, I mean, we have a sense of how it may have made our parents or our classmates or a teammate or a friend or something like that feel. But how did it make you feel to know that you hurt someone else, that you wounded a relationship that at least up to that point in time had been incredibly important to you? Now, one of the things to keep in mind as we begin thinking about the choices that we made, and some of them haven't always been good, is the fact that in Jesus, our past doesn't have to determine our future. And in Jesus, we can make choices today that can completely change where we're going to end up in a few years. And my life's just a great example of that, of how a life can be changed from going one direction and end up somewhere else. I mean, I probably should have been voted most unlikely to ever be a pastor. And yet that's exactly what God chose for me on that journey. So this evening, we're going to consider someone in the Bible who declared that he was the worst of, you know, and think about his situation. This is the Apostle Paul. You guys are all familiar with the Apostle Paul, I hope. Pretty important character in Scripture. But he said in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, among who I am the most. And so Paul considered himself, up to that point in time, to be one of the worst sinners walking on the earth. Now, sometimes you say things like that, and you don't really mean it. Oh, I'm a terrible person. And really what that means is, yeah, I made a mistake, and I want you to forgive me. So if I act like I feel bad about it, you're more likely to give me some slack there. But the reality is Paul knew his journey. And he felt completely justified in saying that he was the worst among all sinners. In fact, he describes it in 1 Timothy, the same chapter, but in verse 13, he says, I was previously a blasphemer. In other words, he spoke evil of God and of God's people. A persecutor. He persecuted the church, and a violent aggressor. I mean, Scripture tells us that he put people in prison. He was at the stoning of Stephen, and he participated in these things. And so when he thinks about his life pre-Jesus, he felt completely justified in saying, man, among the sinners in this world, I am absolutely the worst. Just think for a moment what Paul had to overcome in his journey forward in terms of overcoming broken relationships and hurts so that he could be faithful to God with the life that he was going to live from that point on. And that's where we're at. We're sitting right here today on a cusp. Doesn't matter what we did yesterday. Doesn't matter what we did today. We may have to make amends. We may have to say we're sorry, but it doesn't determine where we can go tomorrow. We determine that. We make those choices, whether we're going to stay on the path we're on, continuing to do the things we're doing, or we're going to go in another direction. In fact, you think back about Paul, he would have been voted most likely to kill Christians and destroy the church, etc. Not most likely to plant the majority of all first century churches throughout the Mediterranean and to write half of the books in the New Testament. He wouldn't have been voted most likely to do those things, and yet he had a moment. And in that moment, God redeemed his life, and Paul began a new journey. He chose to accept the changes that Christ was willing to make in his life and go forward from there, living things differently. So Paul himself tells us the things that need to be a priority for us to reorder our lives and to be used of God. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, Paul, some of my favorite verses, he says these things: whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, anything worthy of praise, focus on these things. Now, that wasn't a checklist for it. Paul wasn't giving us a checklist of do this, do this, do this. He said, basically, if there's anything good, then do good. He says, if there's anything in this world that brings joy and love and happiness and peace to others, do those things. You choose. We live in a world that doesn't always support us in those decisions, but that has no impact upon whether we can choose to go that direction or not and to follow God. See, all these things can be summed up in one word: integrity. Integrity is just a really great word to describe the package that becomes how you choose to live your life. How you choose to speak, how you choose to act, how you choose to treat others, how you choose to behave in church, out of church, at home, in school, wherever it may be. Our integrity is that thing that we have, that it's true of us when we're with others and when we're by ourselves. It's not something we put on. We're going out today, so we have to put on integrity. I'm going to church today, so I have to put on integrity. Integrity is who we choose to be. And Paul says, to be a person of integrity, do the things that are good. And so keeping this in mind, that the choices we make from this day forward will determine the people that we will be from this day forward. And I just love the fact that at any moment in time, even at 7:37 on Sunday, October 20th, at that moment in time, I can choose to live differently. I can choose a new course for my life. I can choose a new direction, and God honors that. Now, any of us that have tried to make those changes in our life recognize that sometimes the people around us don't always encourage and support us in those choices. But they don't have to live, in most cases, with the choices I'm going to make about my life. I do. I have to live with the consequences of those. And so I just love the fact that on this moment, in this place, at this time, I can choose to do better. I can choose to do better with my life from this moment forward. When you think about most likely to, the great people in this world choose a life of integrity. Now, the reality is, most of us aren't going to see great in terms of how the world sees great, but we can see really, really good. And so good people choose integrity. And that's why I just want to encourage you tonight to choose to do good, to choose to be good, to choose to be a person of integrity, because the choices you make today will determine who you're going to be from this day forward. Now, in most cases, it doesn't end at 25. You get another chance to start over. And maybe at 30, and maybe at 35, and maybe at 40. But your life may be a series of, from this moment forward, I'm going to do better. But our ability to learn what it looks like to do better on any given day is going to start with a decision made on one day, in one moment, that from this point in time, I choose to do better.